There's certain words I could use to describe the Tesla Model S Plaid, but one of them that springs to mind is ludicrous. Now, at the time of filming and in the UK, it costs £100,000 and extends to roughly £120,000. That is, of course, dependent on Tesla's inventory because the vehicles are imported in. And indeed, over here, you have got left-hand drive models available only, and it does, of course, have its own limitations. Now, in this review, I'll be comparing it to the likes of the Porsche Taycan, the Taycan Cross Turismo and the Audi e-tron GT, all of which I've already reviewed. Now, before proceeding with this video, I would just like to thank Antcharge for sponsoring it. More on them a little bit later. So to kick things off, let's talk about what makes the Tesla Model S Plaid so special in comparison to its competitors. And of course here is its straight line performance. See, here you've got 3 electric motors, 2 at the rear, 1 at the front. And the combination mean that you output a staggering 1020 horsepower or 760 kilowatts. You have also got a whopping 1420 Newton meters of torque, which is absolutely mind-boggling. Now, you just saw me launch it just before, but I want you to experience it with me. Now, in order for you to get the actual launch correct, you have to enable drag strip mode. Now, this actually takes between 2 to 7 minutes to initiate, but once it's done, you'll be able to hear a very loud fan at the front of the vehicle. I'm not sure if it's going to really pick up from my camera, but as soon as you step outside, you'll be able to hear it really much ramping up. It's almost like the air conditioning's on full whack. Now, when that is done, you've effectively got the peak performance of the Model S Plaid, and you can enable cheetah stance. Now, this is effectively launch control. You put your foot down on the brake pedal and you put your foot down on the accelerator pedal. Then it prepares to launch. So effectively right now, it's lowering the suspension and getting it in a way that it's going to get the peak sort of performance out of it. And right now, through my instrument cluster, I have got a little notification saying it's ready to launch. And my heart is beating because I know what's coming. So here we go. My gosh! Wow. Okay, it absolutely takes my breath away as to the performance of this vehicle. Indeed, its straight line speed is something that I have never ever experienced before, and that also includes with the likes of the Porsche Taycan Turbo, albeit not the Turbo S, and even the Audi e-tron GT, and again, albeit not the GT RS. But I just don't think any car is ever going to come close to this vehicle, at least at its price point. Of course, if we're looking at hypercars, we've got like the Rimac Nevera, and we've got a variety of other super high performance hypercars in the electric market, but at this price point, there's nothing that's going to take your breath away like this vehicle does. And it actually makes my palms really sweaty each time I'm driving this car, at least, of course, if I am going to be launching it. Now, the same sort of performance can be said when you are going to be doing, let's say, an overtaking maneuver on the motorway, or just simply just putting your foot down to the metal whenever you want. You're going to feel that amount of torque instantly. And of course, it is an electric vehicle with the tri-motor setup. Now, using Race Logic's Performance Box Touch, I actually had it tested from 0 to 20 miles an hour in just 0.86 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 1.23 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in a whopping 2.4 seconds, and 50 to 70 miles an hour in just 0.89 seconds. That is absolutely mind-boggling speeds, let alone the fact that I experienced 1.25 Gs of acceleration. Now, as for its top speed, it will get up to 200 miles an hour, although there are certain reports out there that suggest that it can't currently achieve that without certain software updates, which are due to come out at a later date. Nonetheless, I've got no means of actually verifying that because I live in the UK and didn't have access to a track. But apart from going in a straight line, what does concern me is how it handles around winding roads. Now, in this respect, through the infotainment system, you've got quite a degree of customization. Through the pedals and steerings tab, you have got the steering mode, which you can select between comfort, standard and sport. And then you've also got a track mode where you can customize the handling balance, the stability assist, and even the regenerative braking. I'll touch upon the latter a little bit later. As for the suspension, you have got the ability to adjust the ride height between very high, high, medium and low, and the adaptive suspension dampening between comfort, auto, sport and even advanced, where you can adjust the ride comfort and handling to your own user preference. Now, the combination of this means that the vehicle is actually pretty comfortable to drive. However, when it comes to being dealt with really challenging routes, the Tesla Model S Plaid really cannot compete with the likes of the Audi e-tron GT or GT RS, the Porsche Taycan or the Taycan Cross Turismo, no matter which variation you go for, from the 4S to the Turbo S, and even the likes of the BMW i4 M50, which I know is not exactly a vehicle of its class, but it's still worth considering that the BMW still has got that better driver's feel. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say over here is that the Model S Plaid, while it is very fun to drive in a straight line, certainly does not compete when driving at a certain speed around winding roads, and therefore means that it just doesn't give you that same sort of driver's input or indeed that sensation when you're behind the wheel. Equally, from my own driving experience of the Tesla Model S Plaid, I felt that the brakes were a little bit inadequate. Now, I'm not a seasoned racing driver, nor someone that has extensive usage of a track, but rather someone that tests it on regular UK roads, and therefore when I'm comparing and contrasting between cars, I felt that the overall brake performance of this vehicle, at least for something that outputs 1020 horsepower and a ridiculous 1420 newton meters of torque, should have beefier brakes. But unfortunately here, Tesla fitted 4-piston 395mm at the front and single-piston 365mm at the rear. I just don't think that is really capable of actually dealing with the overall stopping power that's required for a vehicle of its class. Now, thankfully, you can actually upgrade this via the track package, and I would go as far as saying that be it if you're on or off the track, you'll certainly want to invest in this, at least, of course, if you're going to be launching the car or driving it quite fruitfully on winding country roads. Now, another issue that I encountered was its overall suspension system. While it's appreciated that it does have the adaptive dampening and therefore is far more comfortable than the likes of the Model Y or the Model 3, it is not quite up to scratch in comparison to its German counterparts. Here, the likes of the adaptive suspension that is found on the Audi e-tron GT or the GT RS, the BMW i4 M50 and the Porsche Taycan in pretty much all of its variations, it's just really no competition. The German counterparts do it far better and provide you even better dampening, be it if you're pottering around town or indeed going around winding country roads. On the flip side, however, I will say that the Tesla Model S Plaid did do very well in providing me good stability. It's got an all-wheel drive configuration thanks to the 3 motors, as a reminder, 1 at the front and 2 at the rear, and it means that traction was absolutely excellent. I also didn't encounter any sort of body roll and therefore felt pretty planted on the ground. So while the Tesla cannot compete when it comes to the overall driving dynamics to some of its German counterparts, where it really does excel is when it comes to its electric range and the overall efficiency that one can attain. Indeed, over here you have got 100 kilowatt-hour gross, or roughly 99 kilowatt-hour net, according to certain sources on the internet, because the manufacturer oddly doesn't claim it themselves, be it on the spec sheet or indeed via the press material that was provided. Here you have also got a heat pump that does come fitted as standard, which is certainly appreciated for those more colder climate drives. Now, the manufacturer claims that the Model S Plaid will achieve roughly 373 miles, at least on the mixed WLTP cycle. However, from my own driving, which was actually pretty ridiculous with the amount of launches that I attained, I got it between 250 to 270 miles. I suspect here if I wasn't doing as many launches and driving it a little bit more comfortably, and therefore potentially having a little less fun, I'd be able to net closer to 290 to 310 miles. And just putting that into perspective, that is far superior than all of its competitors, even the likes of the BMW i4 M50, which is nowhere near in terms of the overall performance or class of the Model S Plaid, but yet over here is pretty much roughly 100 miles lower in terms of its electric range that it is able to provide. Effectively, what I'm trying to say over here is that the overall efficiency that Tesla has been able to attain from its battery pack and its electric motors should really be commended. However, despite all of its competencies, I am quite disappointed to see that Tesla has removed the ability to adjust the regenerative braking modes on the fly. Sure enough, you've got that track mode that you can select through the infotainment system, but not everyone wants to drive in track mode at all given times. And in this respect, it would have been great if you just had a simple toggle between low and standard. Instead, you have got a one-pedal drive that's enabled at all given times. Now granted, I absolutely love driving in said mode and therefore would be my preferred usage. However, I know there are some people out there that would have liked some customization, or for example just dislike driving in one pedal mode in the first place. Now apart from that, when it comes to charging, this is another area where Tesla really does reign supreme. And I'm not just talking about the supercharger network, which by the way I think is getting quite crowded nowadays, but in this respect you have got a vehicle that not only takes up to 250 kilowatts of input, but it's actually very good at keeping up that high state of charge, because a lot of vehicles actually tail off, such as the Porsche Taycan, but that's not the case with the Model S Plaid. Now here it means that you can go from 10 to 80% in roughly 30 minutes. If, however, you're going to find a V2 supercharger, it will take you roughly 35 minutes to attain the same amount of charge. As for a regular 50 kilowatt input, which you might be able to find more commonly with other providers, it will take you 1 hour and 24 minutes. Now, if you do not want to be rapidly degrading your battery by regularly plugging it in at a DC charge point, you have of course got AC chargers, and that is of course attained via its Type 2 port. Now here, the manufacturer provides an 11.5 kilowatt onboard charger, which is actually quite disheartening because some of its competitors, even ones that are even plug-in hybrids, offer you up to 22 kilowatts. And the reason that's important is because if you were to find a 3-phase 22 kilowatt public charger, you would have been able to recharge the vehicle at a much more rapid rate. Nonetheless, over here, via an 11 kilowatt charger, it will take you 10 hours and 15 minutes to go from 0 to 100%. As for a regular 7 kilowatt wall box, it will take you 15 hours and 15 minutes. And here, if you were to plug it in via regular 3-pin input, it will take you a whopping 48 hours and 45 minutes. Now on the subject of charging, this perfectly brings me on to today's sponsor, AntCharge, a free app that gives you credit for providing feedback on your charging experience, which you can then use to spend with the likes of Amazon, Apple, Hyundai, Kia, or better still, donate it straight to charities. Now, due to the nature of the app, you'll also be able to quickly find your nearest chargers, such as this one from Source London. Equally, you can see how they've been rated by fellow EV enthusiasts, giving you peace of mind before traveling to said location. All that's required is to sign up using an email, so all your data remains anonymous. If you download the AntCharge app using the link below, you'll even get some starting credits. So aside from how it performs on the road, what about when it comes to be sat within the cabin? Well, first off, in terms of the use of materials, it's a massive step up over the likes of the Tesla Model 3 and the Tesla Model Y. However, I don't think it really competes with the likes of BMW, Porsche and Audi. Indeed, over here, the use of materials that have been used throughout the dashboard, the headliner, or even in terms of the stitching work, just feels a bit more premium in the German alternatives. But of course you might disagree with me, and furthermore might absolutely love the minimalist design that Tesla are going for. So do let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Now objectively, however, I can say that cabin noise has been kept down to a minimum, even at higher speeds, because you've got active noise cancellation technology which has been integrated via the microphones that are positioned within the headrests. It's a great little design from the manufacturer and therefore provides a real serene in-cabin experience. If you want a detailed breakdown of the sound measurements, do check out my detailed audio review that can be found on your pop-up banner, down the description below, or indeed in the pinned comments. Now this does actually perfectly lead me on to its audio system, and here, as standard, you have got a 22 speaker system that outputs 960 watts. Here it really does completely obliterate the likes of Audi and Porsche's offerings, however it does not quite compete with the premium Bowers & Wilkins system that's found in the BMW i7. Yet again, you can find some more information on my audio review. Now when it comes to the use of technology, you've got a 17-inch display, which no longer uses a portrait format like you'd find on the original Model S, and instead opts for a landscape format, which in my opinion does actually work much better. Furthermore, the display itself can be tilted towards the driver, towards the passenger, or even kept in a center position. Great little thinking by the manufacturer. Now the display itself is very much pivotal in terms of the operational usage of the vehicle. And no, I'm not even referencing the touch-based climate controls, the built-in navigation system, the plethora of options that you have with tinkering around with how the vehicle responds, or even the fantastic suite of apps that you have to keep yourself entertained. But rather, the fact that you have got the drive mode selector that is operated via the 17-inch display. Indeed, over here you have to swipe up to go into drive and swipe down to go into reverse and tap to park. It might actually take a few people by surprise, like myself. However, once you get your head around it, it is actually quite intuitive to use. Now, if you are worried that the display might go faulty one day, thankfully Tesla have thought about it. There's another touch-based input bar that can be found just below the wireless chargers at the front of the cabin. What isn't as good, however, is the fact that Android Auto and Apple CarPlay have been omitted altogether. There's very much the same case that could be said about any other Tesla vehicle, but it's just worth highlighting if you're comparing and contrasting versus some of the alternatives. Speaking of its rivals, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and by that I mean its steering wheel. Now, its position, at least for those of us who drive in the UK, is a joke. Spending over £100,000 for a left-hand drive vehicle is absolutely preposterous. Each time you come up to a ticket barrier, you're going to have to come out of the vehicle. Now, European viewers out there will be absolutely laughing their heads off, but I'm sure you would have experienced the same if you've ever taken your car and brought it to the UK. It's just not something you'd expect, specifically for a modern vehicle. Sure enough, if it was an old school import of such, I would have no problems with it. But for a modern Tesla, no thanks. Now, as for the design itself, it's got a yoke as standard. However, if you want that more traditional design, like fitted on this vehicle, you'll have to splash out an additional £780. Of course, over here, you do not have a configurator as such, so if you're looking at the inventory, it might actually explain the differences in terms of the price. Now, as for the steering wheel buttons, you've got haptic buttons themselves, and you've also got some physical dials on either side. Right-hand side to initiate the autopilot and cruise control settings, and on the left-hand side for your media controls. Now, you have also got an additional function on the left-hand side wheel where you can actually press it down and therefore initiate, for example, changing the acceleration mode or indeed the steering input, which is actually quite good and can be configured via the infotainment system. However, I do find that if you're going left or right on said wheels, it doesn't seem to initiate a certain correct response. In other words, the input seems to be sometimes mistaken by a singular press down. So for example, if I'm changing a track and I'm therefore pushing towards the right-hand side, it would sometimes think that I'm actually going play and pause instead. I found it quite cumbersome, and therefore it would have been great if actually Tesla optimized this. Now, next to said scroll wheel, you might have noticed two arrows, and yes indeed, they're your indicators. Now, I've got no sort of issue when it comes to the overall operation usage because they've got that haptic feedback sort of feel, and furthermore, they do not get accidentally initiated when you're cornering at speed, unlike vehicles, for example, from the Volkswagen Group. However, when it comes to exiting a roundabout, it's a real cause for concern, not only for myself, but also for other motorists. Yes, indeed, over here, indicating off a roundabout is a problem because you'll have to find the button on the steering wheel, which is obviously not going to be in its center position. So here I really think Tesla should have thought outside of the box, or indeed integrated a different sort of design, be it via sort of flappy paddles, or indeed integrate a clever system which would initiate and know that it's coming up to a roundabout, and therefore when you are turning your steering wheel in a certain different direction, it would automatically know I am trying to indicate off a roundabout. But alas, that's not the case, and therefore should be something that you should be concerned about when it comes to driving this vehicle on European or UK roads. Aside from this, another complaint that I have when it comes to be sat behind a steering wheel is the driver's display, as it's not customizable like you'd find on rival alternatives. Thankfully, however, it does provide you all the key driving information and also has the built-in navigation system that's directly fed through it, of course when it is actually in operation. However, it is a shame that there is no extension of this, in other words, in form of a head-up display. Indeed, it's omitted altogether in the Tesla Model S Plaid, which is quite surprising given Tesla's pedigree in the tech sector. With that in mind, I absolutely love the use of the Tesla app. Not only is it intuitively laid out, but it also allows you to use your phone as a key. Better still, there are certain controls that you can initiate from afar. For example, you can precondition the cabin, you can open up the tailgate, prop open the front, or indeed the charging port. You can pinpoint the location of the vehicle, and even in certain countries, you can even summon it straight to you thanks to the use of your smartphone. Just to add the cherry on top, you've got something called Sentry Mode, which effectively allows you to use the camera systems of the vehicle in order to give you a little bit more of that peace of mind. Of course, all these features are also present on the cheaper Model 3 and the Model Y, but it's still worth pointing out that they're also present on the Model S and of course the Model X. Now, apart from that, when it comes to be sat at the rear of the cabin, I really love the fact that there is a touchscreen 9.4-inch display. It's very intuitively laid out as well, and also provides you basic controls, for example climate, and even for your infotainment system, and therefore means that those who are sat at the back can really enjoy certain, let's say, YouTube videos or even watch Netflix. Very useful if you've got kids, for example. Now, as for being sat at the rear, I've got no problems whatsoever when it comes to legroom, and that is in part due to the fact that you've got a completely flat floor, therefore meaning that even the rear middle occupant won't be left uncomfortable. However, it's worth considering that very much like a lot of electric vehicles, the seats are slightly diagonally wedged, and therefore can cause a little bit of discomfort on your quad muscles or your thighs. Now, as for headroom, I have got no real problems. However, if someone is going to be roughly 6'2" to 6'4", they might feel a little bit more hemmed in. Of course, the same could be said about a lot of its competitors, so there's no real complaints in this department. Now, what I really love as well is the fact that all the rear seats are heated as standard. And yes, indeed, that also includes the middle seat, which is quite a rarity in most modern EVs. Now, as for the front of the vehicle, both seats are heated and ventilated, and you've got electronic controls that come fitted as standard. Furthermore, you've got lumbar support, and you've also got a heated steering wheel, all of which are certainly great to see, and given the fact that you don't have to add an additional option like you'd find on some of the German alternatives, it is very much appreciated. Now, very much on that point, it's fantastic to see that as standard you have got a fixed tinted panoramic glass roof. However, it would have been even better if the manufacturer had incorporated an electronically operated sunshade. Unfortunately here, if you do want a sunshade, you'll have to purchase it as an additional extra, and this is just as a physical unit instead. So it just doesn't look as snazzy as some alternatives out there on the market. Now, past that, I would also like to highlight that in terms of operating the doors, I had no problems, be it from the exterior of the vehicle where the door handles prop open on touch input, or indeed from within the cabin where you simply press on a button and it initially opens the door and then you just have to manually prop it open yourself. Now, in a case of an emergency only, you can always prop open the doors, and therefore means that there is a lever found on all the 4 doors, therefore making it very handy for those emergency situations. Of course, you won't want to do that on a day-to-day basis because it could damage the windows. Now, elsewhere, I would also like to highlight that there is a pressure sensor that's found within the driver's seat. This is very intuitive. As you step inside the vehicle somewhat powers on, and if you put your foot down on the brake pedal, you can then initiate drive. This is very intuitive if you're a singular occupant. However, it's worth considering that if you have kids that are sat at the back, or for example, you've got an occupant on the front passenger seat, then it can be somewhat cumbersome because it can power down the vehicle. Thankfully, however, the infotainment system can be easily powered on, be it from the front or rear of the cabin, indeed due to the inclusion of those 2 screens. So I've got no real inherent complaints over here in comparison to some of its competitors that operate on a start-stop basis, and therefore means that you'll have to have a button that is pressed at the front of the cabin. That's not the case within the Tesla, and furthermore, given the fact that you have got that fantastic app, it means that you've got great sort of versatility. So aside from entering and exiting the vehicle, what about when it comes to storage? Well, at the front it's absolutely excellent. You've got the glove box, which is pretty sizable, and also gives you the ability to lock it via a PIN code that can be set through the infotainment system. Great for added security. As for the center console, at the front of it, you have got 2 fast wireless charging bays, which is handy for both you and your front occupant. Further down, you've actually got multiple compartments. First off, you've got a small little bay which can be handy, for example, for a small size wallet or purse, and then you've also got 2 cup holders. Then, underneath these compartments, you've got an even larger area. Over here, you'll also find 2 USB Type-C ports which can be used for charging. There's also a further 2 USB Type-C ports at the rear of the cabin, and it's worth noting that they do deliver up to 36 watts of power, therefore good for fast charging a smartphone. Now back to the center console, underneath the center armrest you've even got an even larger area, which is very good for a medium to small size purse or indeed a larger size wallet. Or of course if you've got sunglasses, loose change or anything else. Speaking of which, over here you've also got the front door bins, which are pretty large, which can also accommodate a 500ml bottle. The rear two are unsurprisingly a little bit more limited. However, if you do want to expand space at the rear and you're not using the rear middle seats, you'll want to drop it down. And in this respect, you'll find multiple compartments and better still 2 wireless charging bays. So yes, indeed, there's 2 wireless charging bays at the rear of the cabin and 2 at the front. Fantastic for those long haul journeys. Now, of course, when it comes to storage, we have to talk about its boot. And here you've got 709 litres of capacity, or 1,739 litres when you drop down the seats. Indeed, it is absolutely excellent. Now here you've got a hatchback design and an electronically operated tailgate, which can be initiated via the infotainment system, the app, and a button found just above the number plate. Then you've got 60/40 rear split folding seats, which can be somewhat dropped down via a little latch button found at the rear of the cabin, or indeed buttons found just behind the seats themselves. Then you've also got an absolutely humongous underfloor compartment and side compartments as well, which should certainly suffice for your charging cables. However, it is worth considering that you do not have an integrated ski latch, nor a place to store your boot load cover. Now, given it's a fully electric vehicle, it's no surprise to learn that there is a frunk. In other words, a compartment found underneath the front bonnet. And here it's pretty sizable at 89 litres. Now, it's worth considering that you can electronically prop it open via the infotainment system and your app. However, to close it, you'll still have to manually do it yourself. So moving on from storage, let's talk about its exterior design. And in this respect, I've got no complaints whatsoever. See here, it's got a bit more of a snazzier design over the original Model S, and it's got a bit more of that aggressive feel in comparison to the Model 3, which is no surprise given the overall power that it outputs. Now at the front you've got headlights that feed seamlessly with the rest of the body. As for the side, you have got body coloured wheel arches and side skirts, concealed door handles which add to the overall drag coefficient, which is rated at 0.208, and you've also got 19-inch alloys that come fitted as standard, or optional 21-inch alloys which you can see pictured. As for the rear, you have got an integrated spoiler and some very nice looking tail lights. As for your colour options, it really depends as to the overall budget, but just bear in mind certain colours will cost more than others. For example, the red will be the most premium option that you can choose. Now elsewhere, I should point out that it has a towing capacity that's rated at 750 kilograms for unbraked trailers and 1,600 kilograms for brake trailers. As for its roof load capacity, it's rated at 75 kilograms. Now on the subject of its roof, or more specifically the glass that's positioned on it, you will actually be pleased to know that it scored 5 out of 5 stars on Euro NCAP's rigorous crash test. In fact, it scored a whopping 94% in adult occupancy tests, 91% in child occupancy, and a ridiculous 98% in its safety assist score. Indeed, across the board, it does a phenomenal job. Now in terms of your driver assistance systems, it is a little bit primitive. However, you have got lane departure warning and mitigation, and autopilot, which actually does work a treat in terms of regulating the distance from the leading vehicle. Now furthermore, you can enhance the experience by adding a £3,400 option to have navigate on autopilot and auto lane change, which effectively means that when you're indicating, it will automatically change the lane for you, and therefore means that you only have to apply a very slight pressure on the steering wheel. Now, should you want to go one step further, you can add full self-driving capabilities, FSD for short, and this comes in at £6,800. Now, in my opinion, it's not actually worth the money because it's somewhat limited in Europe and in the UK due to legislation. Nonetheless, you will also have traffic sign and also stop sign control, and in the future, even auto steer on the city streets, which can be handy in certain scenarios. Now, in terms of navigating city streets, you will be pleased to know that visibility at the front and the side are absolutely excellent. You've also got small little cutouts found towards the A-pillars, which makes it great for cornering. However, it's worth considering that rear view visibility is a little bit more limited due to the design of the vehicle. Nonetheless, you have got high-resolution 360-degree cameras that come fitted as standard, giving you great peace of mind when you're doing any sort of complex parking maneuver. On that note, you've got a turning circle of 12.3 meters and even an auto park feature that actually does work a treat in certain scenarios. However, it is worth considering that there is no rear wiper and there is no washer jet for your rear camera, meaning that you'll have to wipe the rear camera if you do traverse on muddy terrain. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict. And the best way to summarise the Tesla Model S Plaid is that it goes ridiculously fast in a straight line, competing with hypercars. You've also got fantastic efficiency from its battery pack and electric motors, and it's actually quite competitively priced, undercutting its rivals, and therefore makes it quite affordable, at least if you're looking for a high-performance saloon. As a result of this, it gets our Performance Award. However, it is worth considering some of the limitations. First off, if you're in the UK, you're looking at a left-hand drive vehicle only, which in my opinion is completely unacceptable. Nonetheless, over here, if you're outside of the UK or simply do not care about this, then you should look at its interior. its overall design and the materials that have been used can't quite compete with the German alternatives. Similarly over here, you've got a lack of physical control. Specifically over here, no stalks behind the steering wheel, meaning that when you're going around roundabouts, it's going to be really cumbersome. Furthermore, the use of technology is a bit lackluster. For a company like Tesla, I was actually expecting a little bit better. Granted, it's not present on the likes of the Model X or the Model 3 or even the Model Y, but you've not got Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. Furthermore, you've not got a customizable instrument cluster, and you've not even got a head-up display, all of which are quite disappointing. Furthermore here, when it comes to the overall driver's feel, the suspension system and the brakes, they can't quite compete with, again, the German alternatives. Now granted, you can upgrade the brakes via the track package, and it's certainly something that I would see myself recommending, at least if I was going to get the Tesla Model S Plaid, be it if I'm on or off the track. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of the vehicle down in the comment section below, and if you feel it hits or indeed misses the mark in comparison to the alternatives out there. Now if you've liked this independent detail review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.